Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is it's so lovely to see you all, yeah, here we are. Thank you again for joining us at webinar 11 of the Insider Guides industry webinars. A big thank you to all of you who have been sending us some really lovely feedback actually over the past few weeks. We started these webinars as a way to keep the sector talking, and you know, they've become a popular forum for big ideas and developments to be discussed and assumptions to be questioned. So thank you again for supporting what we're doing. It's really lovely to do this. My name is James Martin. I run Insider Guides. We prepare, welcome and support international students coming to Australia. And at the moment, we're helping students understand and navigate what's happening to them at the moment. And there's a lot going on. So you know, we're doing a lot of content online about all of their various aspects to do with navigating hardship funds and quarantine and accommodation and things like that. So if you have any international students looking for this sort of information, please do send them to insiderguides.com.au. We're also helping organizations that want to target that market at different stages of their timeline through online as well. So if you have missed past webinars, you can always head to insiderguides.com.au/webinars. You can see all of them there. There's 10. It's crazy to say that. There's 10 other webinars we've been doing there. So let's get on with it. I'll do a little introduction. So over the past 10 industry webinars, we've really focused on the university sector. And this week we turn our discussion to the important vet sector. And after such a disruption from COVID's border closures, you know, will vet students return to Australia? And how can vet meet the demands of international students? What can the vet sector do to take advantage of the changing international education landscape? And what could the sector look like in a post-COVID world? Will the issue of affordability push people away from vet and other parts of the sector alike? Or will a rise in highly targeted short courses allow the vet sector to explode with job-ready graduates? To delve into these issues and more, I'd like to welcome back my co-host, Rob Lawrence. Rob is well known across the education sector. He's an internationally renowned researcher and strategist who possesses extensive credentials across all levels of education. Thanks for joining us again, Rob.
Great pleasure, thank you.
And I'd also like to introduce today's guest speaker. Really honoured to have Janelle Chapman. So Janelle is the lead for all international business activities at TAFE Queensland, the largest vet provider in Queensland. With more than 25 years of experience in vet, Janelle is a strong advocate for the vet sector. She is also IEAA's current vice president, is a vet content expert, and sits on the Council for International Education. Janelle, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, James and Rob.
Okay, so before we get started, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Do feel free to ask questions. This is an interactive webinar. We will try and get to as many questions as possible. And we'll launch a poll midway through the webinar as well. So we'd love to get your insights. We've been learning a lot about the sector through these little poll questions every week. Just last week, we learned from David Lloyd, the Vice Chancellor of UniSA, that the sector was a little bit cautious and concerned about the quarantine situation regarding international students coming in, and that was news to me, really, that there was that level of concern. I thought that was going to be okay, but maybe not. At the end of the webinar, you'll be invited to complete a short survey, so please feel free to do that. Rob and I are always trying to improve these and change the formats and change everything to make it more useful for the sector. And all of our webinars are recorded, and we'll send you the link after this, and it will go to our YouTube channel as well. So let's get into it. Over to you, Rob.
James, thank you. Thank you for a lovely introduction. Lovely to be discussing vet, and it's been a delight to work with you, so thank you. Janelle, thank you as well for coming along today. I've been a long-term fan, and I've been a long-term advocate of utilising vet qualifications as a vehicle for making graduates more skills ready. And industry will see changing skills settings, in part due to Industry 4.0, and also the fact that workplace settings are changing. And we've also seen some interesting patterns emerging. We've recently seen, for example, that over 50% of Indian students enrolled in vet previously studied at higher education level. and the number or proportion of the Nepalese students was similarly high. Janelle, do you envisage an increase in the number of international students completing their degrees and then becoming more workplace ready through a VET work ready pathway? It's almost like I'm suggesting, is there potential for a VET finishing school?
Thanks, Rob. Yes, I do. But I also think that this has always been the case, that often students who have a degree will come to a vocational institute to be able to be work ready or job ready. So the fact that they have a qualification doesn't necessarily mean that they have the skill set to be able to gain a job. We've looked at this a lot over the last couple of years, and it's certainly a priority for international students to have those job ready skills. We've been able, as many other VET providers have done, is include this sort of training as part of the program that they're studying, or alternatively, we have an online program that we get our students to do even before they come on shore, so that they have some skills ready to get a part-time job. The biggest issue will obviously be about how Home Affairs views someone who already has a degree wanting to come to do a vocational program. Historically, it has meant that, you know, Home Affairs have rejected a lot of people because of that reasoning. They don't see it as a valid entry requirement. And so that's a bit of education that we need to do back to Home Affairs. But it is a valid thing, and it's certainly a global trend for people to already have a degree but want to have some vocational skills on top of that. About 10 years ago, for us in TAFE Queensland, as a case study, we developed vocational postgraduate qualifications. So they sat on the same AQF level as certificates and diplomas in the higher ed sector, but they had a vocational twist to them. And that was really an important tool at the time, because students with a degree didn't necessarily just want to have a certificate or diploma afterwards. They wanted to be able to build on their degree. So I think there are a range of options, but I really firmly believe that we need to educate Home Affairs that just because someone has a degree up front doesn't mean that they can't want to do a vocational program.
Very interesting. It's funny, I've always been a strong advocate as well. And when people are studying overseas and when they're studying in different institutions, we need to maximise the student experience. And it's often been a challenge for the VET sector, because often they're highly dependent upon part-time employment, etc. And also the VET sector can be particularly challenging in one sense to, let's say, retain and reskill students or keep upskilling them, because there's often a sense of urgency for these students to complete and then move on. Yet, one of the things we keep advocating, and you've made reference to it, is this idea of building this individually differentiated portfolio. Is essential for really presenting oneself as relevant, up-to-date, and portable, I guess it would be the right word. In this environment, do you see let's say the average VET student needing to spend more time, less time, or stay the same in terms of their time on campus, in terms of how much they engage with the experience once they can be back on campus?
Yeah, that's true. I think that it depends on their driver. Are they doing their vocational program as a pathway into their university degree, or alternatively a pathway from ELICOS or school into VET, into higher ed? Or are they looking at the end result as wanting to get into industry, so wanting a career? That will be the deciding factor as to how this is looked at. Vocational institutions have always been the meat and the sandwich, always. You know, unless a student directly wants to go into industry straight after their vocational program, then that's okay. You know, we have the skill sets and the quals for them to be able to do that. More often than not, a parent doesn't see, and I'm talking about an international student parent, doesn't necessarily see the value of just a vocational program. So they want to see that end result of a degree outcome. Now, we can make that work, and certainly institutions over the years have looked at pathways and mapping their degrees and diplomas so that there is a seamless pathway from one to the other with no more time generally, and they gain credit for their vocational programs. that's a great result for students because they get both the theoretical and the conceptual and the practical component. So it does make it a more well-rounded study plan. I think vocational institutions generally have a bit of an advantage that the programs that they deliver can often mean that a student can be working part-time in those industries and actually not only being able to support themselves financially, but gaining more skills in that particular industry. So an example might be individual support, where a student might be studying that, working in an aged care home, and gaining skills as well as financial support for themselves. I personally see a future where we have more frequent programs of shorter duration for people to upskill, to be able to move seamlessly and have portable skills that they move around with, to either, you know, upgrade their own skills or move into another career. But that's my personal opinion. I just think the trends over the years, and particularly with COVID-19, we're seeing a range of new emerging, industry that's coming out of this. Is it time now to really push that vocational option where we can do that upskilling quite quickly? The universities call it micro-credentialing, but we've called it skill sets and have for years, you know. It's that cluster of skill sets that gives people the skills that they need to be able to do their own job, a higher level job, or a new job.
Yeah, that's so interesting as well. I think what you touched on in terms of, you know, the jobs of the future and being equipped to actually deliver on these jobs of the future. I was just looking at Google Trends the other day and noticing that some of the most searched terms in industry are things like online physical education, online digital producer, how to teach English online, how to do online cooking classes and things like that. So yeah, it makes me realize that there's this thing that's happening with COVID, where there's industries that would have taken 10 years to evolve that way anyway, and now they're evolving in about a year, and they're being forced to just completely change. And all these companies are just having to completely switch their business models. And what happens when a company switches their business model? They need a completely different skill set in their staff. So, and I really think that's where vet can come into it. However, you know, we do look at the large share of vet students, though, coming from more price sensitive markets. So they often do require access to part-time employment, shared accommodation, and other financial incentives to enable greater affordability. In light of maybe there is a few less part-time jobs, you know, in the hospitality sector for sure. And just how at risk, though, are these students now compared to those in other parts of the education sector, and what can we do to support them?
Yeah, I think vocational students are at risk because often, as you say, their part-time jobs are in the tourism and hospitality, and that's certainly been what we've seen in TAFE Queensland, where they were the first students to lose their jobs, and they'll probably be the last to come back on board until, you know, the tourism and hospitality industry takes off again. I know the Department of Education federally has an active watching brief at the moment on particular regions, and Southeast Asia is one of those regions where they know from surveying the students that Indian students and Nepalese students have a much higher priority or propensity to need to have part-time work to survive. So they're obviously impacted severely in this current climate. You asked the question about what vet institutions are doing to support students, and there are a range of things that all institutions are doing. There are things like, you know, payment plans are put in place now that never were put in before, smaller deposits, even things like not chasing debt. Many providers around Australia will tell you that their liability with debt is the highest it's ever been. Because how do you chase debt when you know a student can't afford to buy food? You know, it's just not the right thing and not the right timing. So that will impact on a range of providers, both large and small, in the long term. There are also things like, you know, some providers are looking at hardship funds where it's financial, you know, payments, or it might be things like, you know, food vouchers that they can buy their own food. Many providers are also looking at increased student support roles. And certainly for TAFE Queensland, we put on extra support people for the ELICOS students, most of all. We felt that they were the ones who were most at risk because of their lower level of English. And, you know, many people have spoken in the industry about trying to navigate what's out there and what's available for students. As an English speaking person, I find it difficult. So for those with English as a second language and may have only just arrived in country, it's really important to support them in a very tangible way to help them navigate what is available to them. There are even things like, you know, adopt a buddy, you know, making sure that, you know, we're keeping in contact with the international students, particularly when they're not coming to class, to be able to ensure that they are in a good space mentally. And, you know, being able to escalate and support wherever it's needed. So you will find that all of those, or a range of those support mechanisms, are in place for every vocational provider, because student support is vital for all of us.
Yeah, and you know, props to TAFE Queensland for rolling out your food bank. That's an amazing initiative what you guys are doing up there. And you know, I actually tried to do that in Adelaide. I got Oz Harvest linked up with Study Adelaide to try and roll out some food vans. I think that's starting next week. So I don't know. I just like what you guys are up to. So you know, it's all about filling need, and it's about just trying to get it going. But yeah, no, congratulations on that. And you're absolutely right. The ELICOS students as well. I mean, I can imagine how difficult it would be, not only for their mental well-being, but also to interpret what is actually happening around them. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, we've seen in Melbourne that as we were speaking about before the webinar, that there's just communicating the crisis to people who don't speak English, and some of the health elements of that is one of the hardest things to do. You know, and then but at the same time, they're a student. They've come here to study, and you know, so I think, yeah, you're doing a very good job. Rob, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. Are you okay if I raise a couple of things? Because I think
yeah, sure.
Both raised some really important points. I've just got 4 very, very quick points to make. James, you made a reference to business accelerating, corporations, industry. Absolutely. They're seeing this as a huge catalyst of change. And I've been speaking a lot with industry over the last few weeks, and it really is absolutely an opportunity for them to reorientate. And they're therefore embracing diagnostic skills tools. That's the first thing. The second thing is about this, a concept I've talked about for years, but it's probably more important than ever, is building an individual kit bag. Because a kit bag is also, it's not just about skills, it's also about capabilities, competencies, and experiences. And of course, the experiences are not always great at the moment for students. The third thing is that the subcontinent students Janelle referred to, they're also heavily loan dependent. So whatever happens, those loan providers are going to be seeking feedback, and families may be struggling to actually repay that, which introduces stress levels and anxiety levels we've never seen before. And the fourth thing, it's just a final comment, but it's one that someone told me years ago. When an international student asks for help, they are desperate.
Yep.
Over to you, James. Sorry.
Yeah,
Can I just add to that, Rob,
sure.
too? That is certainly that cultural understanding. So you were right. You know, whilst we might have had food and we knew that there were students who were desperate out there, they didn't necessarily come to us. So we kind of had to go and find them and let them know that this was okay, but because it was seen as a loss of face for them. They couldn't support themselves. Yes. They couldn't ask their family back home because often their parents had lost their jobs as well. So there wasn't that financial support that they may have been able to depend on, you know, beforehand. You know, the stories I can tell you, just the appreciation has just been phenomenal to see. But it is a real cultural shift for a student often to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely it is. And yeah, and also a lot of these vet students, they kind of needed to be on campus as well. I mean, they needed access to like equipment and labs and group tasks and work sites and things like that. So I'm curious to know how have these recent events impacted that part, that practical application of these vet courses, these vet skills. And yeah, how have you been able to sort of transition into digital platforms, maybe a little bit of VR AR stuff going on? No.
Look, like a lot of vet providers, we were deemed essential. So we've been delivering since word go, since COVID-19 happened. I think there was a week's pause where we weren't on site. But it is obviously a different way of delivery to what our students have been used to. Yes, there is more virtual study, and certainly for us in the ELICOS space, it's been virtual until next Monday, where they will come back face to face. In the vocational space, we looked at the critical skills areas, and we made sure that there was some face to face with those particular programs. Now, again, that meant changes to the way we would normally do things. So it might have been that there were less people in a classroom. We obviously had to adhere to the 4 square metre rules, but it meant that we could open up labs and practical areas that were needed. It varied across our system, as I'm sure it does with many vet institutions, as to the size of the actual space you're talking about. So every single space had to be looked at with what was the capacity for students allowed into that area. We then had to look at a range of, or a mix of that blended delivery, whether it's, some virtual, some practical, maybe pushing everything, all the theory stuff up front, so that could be done in an easier way on a virtual platform, and then looking at doing the practical when they come back on site. But it is, we were all, I can guarantee every single vet provider that I've spoken to across Australia, we were all doing this on the fly, but we had to do it. It was a necessity, and it was just a varying degree with how you were able to manage that. In some program areas, it was easier to do than others, and it may have just been because there were more resources already developed for online delivery in a certain program area. And in other areas, it was, just scrambling, from word go.
I'm sure there is a scramble, yes.
Yeah. But the other important part of this too is we did a lot of professional development with our teachers about how to deliver online to make it engaging for the students. So it's not just a matter of, transferring what you would normally do in a face-to-face environment to an online platform. It doesn't necessarily translate really well. So it is about getting that understanding about there needs to be differences in the way you deliver and how you might do it.
That's interesting. Rob, I actually got a question. I'd like to get your thoughts on this one. Comes from Michael Ingram. Agree very much with Janelle Chapman on home affairs and its perception on students moving from higher ed to vet, and that we need to educate home affairs better. Is there an unfortunate association that vet after higher education has with an elongation of stay as opposed to the development of work readiness? I'd like to hear Rob, then Janelle.
Look, there's reality is there was an element of elongation of stay, particularly if it's difficult to get employment and so on. But I think people's attitudes and perceptions are changing now rapidly. They've got a lot of time, students, to investigate what the future needs are. And there's a lot of commentary at the moment about future skill settings, transitional economies, transitional industries. So I think we're going to see a fundamentally different proposition now and a requirement. I actually thoroughly embrace the idea of higher ed students taking that, as I said earlier, finishing school approach, because they've got a lot of theory, but now they can apply those skills. And actually, I'll probably ask you a question in a moment about the effect that could have on regional industry.
Janelle?
Yeah, look, I agree. Being at the coalface with this and dealing with home affairs on a daily basis, I think there still needs to be some education about the fact that if someone has a degree doesn't necessarily mean that they're just looking at a pathway for permanent residency. There's still inherently that underlying propensity that the student has to validate why they're doing a vocational program if they already have a degree. And yet we know that globally, and then what you're saying, the trends are that people have the theoretical and then want the practical, but from a processing point of view, it's not always looked at that way.
Okay. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, and in fact, just adding on to that, I saw some figures the other day, and I'm going to try and find them in a moment, about the number of people really in India, for example, the chronic shortage of some of the modern skills that are needed. and the value they can add through skills within the India market, etc. Janelle, I know quite rightly that when we had a chat earlier, that we need to talk separately about the public vet system and the private vet system. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because both have had their own individual sets of challenges. So we have the public vet system, we've got the private vet system. Some students transition between the two. And many public vet providers offer what I call broad portfolios, whereas many private providers are dependent upon very narrow and often industry-specific education training. And let's be honest, a lot of them will be having a very hard problem. They're not propped up in other ways, so they have an individual battle to counter. Public has a more diversified cohort as well, so they've got the domestic and international, whereas private are more dependent upon international. And often they offer services and courses that are dependent upon facilities. Have you seen the impact? How have you seen everything impact the public system and the private system, because they are so different?
Yeah, look, and they are. And what you said before about the public system having to cater for community needs, so often has a broader range of programs that they need to deliver, is an important difference. But in saying that, there are many large private providers now that offer a broad range of programs. A smaller provider is likely to offer a narrower range of programs, and it might be because they're the ones that they can deliver it in a cost-effective way, or it might be a niche market where they tend to, deliver to only a particular cohort of students even. I think that we are seeing hurt from whether you're a small private provider, large private provider, or a large public provider. Everyone at this point is hurting. The longer they keep the international borders closed, the longer we will all hurt. The longer the conversations or discussions around a secret corridor pilot project that doesn't include other parts of the industry like the vet or ELICOS sectors is going to hurt us all long term. So whilst there might be the propensity now to have the discussions with the higher ed sector, if the other parts of the sector aren't included, all of those pipeline and pathway students are not going to be there for the future. So those students are going to go to another country. If they can't get into Australia, they'll go somewhere else for their ELICOS and or vet, and then they'll pathway into the higher ed there. The chances are they won't come back to Australia, or a smaller percentage will come back. I think it's, really important, and I've heard this rhetoric a number of times after major catastrophes across the globe, with SARS or the, financial crisis many years ago, that people talk about diversity, and diversity being really important to underpin future growth and sustainable growth across all public and private. If we don't do that this time, we will be in the same situation when the next crisis occurs. So the rhetoric has always been there after a major crisis, but you've got to actually do something to put that diversity strategy in place, to then have a very clear platform to be able to escalate or upscale and downscale in different markets for things outside of your control. The smaller your cohort of students, the more risk that you're always going to take. Now, with international borders closed, that doesn't necessarily have play into the conversation now. But certainly at the beginning of the year, when it was about the China market, those institutions that were very heavily involved with China as a source market, and to the detriment of other markets, were very much impacted. So I just think that, it's the working together is really important, but the government needs to take a cohesive approach to any decisions about the international industry that must include not only higher ed, but vet, ELICOS and schools.
I think vet is going to be a sleeping giant. And talking of that, I had a conversation with Study Queensland last year about the future for vet, and they were very engaged in that space. And I was really, really impressed by how much thought they were giving towards it. So Can I ask you a question about that in relation to Queensland? I know you've got very broad perspectives, but I wouldn't mind knowing, just from a Queensland perspective, a priority therefore was to utilise VET as a lever, let's say, for international graduates to address some of the regional workforce skills gaps. And I ran some interviews for Study Queensland, and it was clearly there's a lot of messaging still to happen, and it depends upon generating momentum through employment, community advocacy, travel, networks. It also requires industry and employers to realise what international VET graduates are, who they are, what they can offer, what their skills are, what their capabilities are, and what their experiences are. It was an interesting exercise. And do you believe that the opportunities were even greater in regional Queensland for VET graduates now? Or do you think there's going to be a challenge getting over this mark where they've had a hiatus?
No, I've always thought Queensland's advantage is its diversity in regions, so we have a very clear remit. TAFE Queensland, for example, has 56 campuses across Queensland, so it's our bread and butter. What has to happen, and it doesn't matter which state you're talking about, you have to be able to meet the needs of the region, and you need to look at what industry is a priority in that region or what's necessary for an economic driver. And then you need to develop and deliver programs that meet the needs of that industry. We find that at that grassroots level, if you get that right, it then just builds on itself. So, you will have, let's say it might be, for us in Queensland, we've got the mining industry out in Mount Isa. We deliver and develop programs there, but that means it gives the ability then to increase capacity for other things across the globe. So what we learn there builds capacity of our trainers to be able to deliver in other countries where mining skills are needed as well. The regional variation, if you get it right, I think is a really important aspect to not only the economic development of that region, but also the profiling of the state as, a global player. If you look at the industry base, making sure that, people know, well, Queensland's really great at this, or Victoria's really great at this, and you can prove it because you have that regional aspect as part of it.
It's really interesting.
James, can I just...
Sorry, go on, Rob.
No, just a very, very small one. One of the things I did pick up, though, is that the VET graduates were not necessarily bracketed as VET graduates. They were often confused with backpackers, with migrants, with refugees, and with higher ed graduates as well. Is there a way around that?
Look, VET's always been the poor cousin in lots of ways, and it is about, we've always had a bit of a bad rap as far as our profiling goes. So I think it is about educating not only people in government, but educating communities about the impact and the positive impact of vocational graduates, that it is about meeting the needs of industry. It is about having that, that really close engagement with industry to ensure not only are you delivering programs that are relevant, but that students have, or graduates have, the job ready skills to be able to work in that industry. Now, many providers across Australia do it in a number of ways, and most VET programs have three components. Theory, a practical simulated on your campus environment, and then out in industry, and having a component of that practical industry link. A student needs to pass all three to be able to be deemed competent or to be able to pass. I think that's really important to make sure that industry is heavily engaged at the front end with the delivery, with what's needed, and often with providers across Australia, industry will often donate equipment so that the students are actually working on what's relevant for that industry. So that close engagement with industry, the close engagement with region, understanding what the priorities are in each region, I think is vital, and making sure that graduate outcomes meet those industry needs in that particular region. And yes, I always think that vocational trained graduates, are going to meet those needs, that they're being trained to be able to be ready to work in that specific industry.
Yeah, I can't help to think about. This is the bit where vet and higher education, the differences are clear in that, especially now, you've got a government that comes out and starts changing the way that university courses are being funded. I really think that the vet sector is primed for a clearer value for money, like in terms of consumer expectations. Students will look at vet and say, well, hold on a second, I can actually do this and meet the demands of industry way faster, way quicker. I can see that like where I need to be within the next 6 months or a year. These are the skills I need. I got to act. I got to go. And I think that's probably where the university is struggling a little bit, and where vet can really thrive. I don't know. I just thought of that. What do you think?
Yeah, look, most vocational programs are shorter term, shorter duration than university study. So there's that, obviously you're quicker to market as long as you're meeting the skill sets that are needed. That's important. But I think the other discerning factor here needs to be that industry needs to acknowledge that these are the skill sets that they need and want, and then employ students, and particularly employ vet students, to be able to meet those needs. So, we still have some issues where industry just assumes that you need someone with a degree. That's the criteria for, to be able to gain a job there. There are a lot of industries now which say the opposite. You don't necessarily need a degree. Yes, that's nice to have, but it's more important that you have this practical component or experience, and whether that job experience is with through an internship or through the practical component of your study, that becomes the key factor in deciding whether that person is the right fit for your company.
Yeah, these sorts of decisions are going to become so pronounced over the next 12 months, where companies are going to have to make better decisions about who they hire, better decisions about the skills needed for the next 12, 18 to, it's going to get real. I think the hiring managers are going to have a little bit of extra work to do to try and work out how they navigate that. Anyway, we'll move on here. I mean, we're not going to see vet students on charter flights anytime soon, as you said, and so the rest of this year's intakes might be heavily compromised. It's a tricky one. But, with generally lower periods of study, there is a high risk of a deficit of international vet students occurring next year, particularly as price plays an important role in that decision-making process. Do you envisage a decline in next year's intake of international students? And what can a vet's institution do to sort of remedy that, given that it in-source country presence? Well, you can't travel. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, and haven't we all spent a lot of sleepless nights wondering about how we're going to do that?
Yes.
There are a couple of things. I've been in this industry for 30 years, and decision-making drivers have always been the things that you talked about before: the employment options, the price sensitivity, location. Different markets probably place more priority on some of those drivers than others. So it is a matter of, just understanding what that is. Many vocational institutions now have in-country reps, so that they have someone representing them full-time in market, and, and they're locals who then can, profile your institution. So that's a bit of a bonus at the moment when the rest of us can't travel. Certainly we've been looking at not only cost-effective ways, but, just ways to profile ourselves that are effective, and being able to do that. And there are a number of companies around now with virtual platforms for the exhibitions and things like that, which we're trialing, and it'll be a bit of a hit and miss, I think, as to how effective they will be. There will always be the case that, you have to follow up. I mean, it's not just a matter of, doing it once. Doesn't matter whether you travel into market. You still need to do that follow-up for conversion. I think into the future that many institutions are probably going to push back on as much travel as we used to have. I think they see now that, the chances are that, we won't need to be in another country as often as we used to. They will look at it as a cost saving exercise. Are we going to have as many students in the vocational space in SEM1 2021? I think it's a resounding no. and it's purely because there won't be the pipeline. If they are only having discussions with higher ed, then for a secure corridor and for any projects that happen, then we won't have the time. I think we need to have a decision probably by September, October at the latest, with the international borders open, to be able to then get our students in here. So I think there will be still a lot more hurt with this. There's only a finite amount of students who are in Australia who will pathway into vet because they've been at schools or ELICOS, and they will, you know, gradually diminish as time goes on. So I think there is a lot of hurt, unfortunately. You know, there may be an opportunity to start our students offshore and then bring them onshore when the borders open. But again, that's going to be a hinder around whether Home Affairs allows that to happen from a visa perspective. You know, if they see a student visa or give a student visa, and then the student starts in their home country for whatever period of time with the view that they would come to us later to do face-to-face, then that could be a bonus for us. But unless that happens, we could be in trouble.
Yeah, we have a question here about this. Many vet students, from an anonymous attendee, thank you for this question. Many vet students consider / aim to apply for a graduate visa after studying. To be eligible for a graduate visa, students need to study 16 calendar months in Australia. However, if the border is going to stay closed, then they're forced to study online. Many of them may not be able to apply for a graduate visa as planned. Do you think the department may amend the requirements for that visa?
There's certainly been talk for the last couple of months about Home Affairs putting out a visa flexibility package, which does include things like waiving of fees for visa extensions for those students who, you know, for outside of their control, need to extend their stay. It also includes about that scenario you just talked about the post-study work rights, that if they're studying virtually, can it be counted towards their 16 months? We're hearing verbally yes, but until we see that in writing, it's a really risky, you know, path to go down. So we would hope, yes, that would be the case. My understanding is that there is a proposal going to Cabinet over the next couple of days that should give us some clarity around some of those things. Our bonus in this respect has been that Universities of Australia has been very vocal and very loud about the post-study work rights issue. So that's going to work in the favour for all the other parts of the industry as well, because if they can get it across, it will mean that, you know, it's right for all of us.
Yeah, there's a template there.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, everybody, remember we have a poll in place. 47% have voted. We've got some interesting questions here. One of which is, what will be the biggest hurdle in 2021 in attracting a new cohort of international students? 59% have said travel restrictions with certain countries. So a resounding majority are saying that it'll be travel restrictions over personal financial difficulties securing loans, or insufficient opportunities to promote in country. So there's some other questions in there. Please feel free to have a look at them. Just in regards to what we were just talking about the decreased pool, could it go the other way though? I mean, if affordability and price comes more into play, you know, and let's call a spade, vet is a bit cheaper. Could we see an upsurge in students choosing degree awarding vet institutions instead of going to university?
Yeah, certainly I think that's a potential, and it's certainly an opportunity for us. I would put a condition around that response. The fact that TAFEs or vet institutions, I think, still need to educate the market that they can deliver higher ed. I think, vet institutions have been obviously traditionally linked with vocational study. To have higher ed degrees as part of their program portfolio is, you know, relatively new, not completely new, and some institutions have done it better than others. But on the whole, I think there's a lot of educating the market about, you know, having to, you know, the benefit of doing that and whether it is the same level. We all know it sits on the same AQF level, has to be, you know, accredited by TEXA, but the market may not necessarily be aware of that.
That's interesting. Rob?
Yeah, I just mentioned earlier that I try and look up and find if I could find some data on what's happening in different countries. And for example, this Skills India mission found that, well, the Indian government actually, through that, found that there's going to be 120 million skilled workers will be required by 2022. Now, I know it's going to change. It still, there's a lot of numbers. But interestingly, only 2% of India's workforce had received any skills training, and only 7 million people a year are involved in vocational education. It's quite interesting to see how the impact is in different countries. And another report in Vietnam talks about 2.2 million could immediately go into skills development and training. So, yeah.
Again,
so bearing that in...
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say the issue around that is that how is VET portrayed or acknowledged in their own market, and that becomes problematic, because if it's seen as those students that aren't good enough to get into university do VET, then that's not going to help our cause.
Yes, exactly right. Well, can I just talk about this, because I think in a transition period, the way we deliver and where we deliver will need to change. And one outcome from all the machinations, and it's something I've been looking at a lot recently, is the impact upon industry. You know, you had a meeting about Vietnam before this webinar, and I immediately think about that $8 billion Samsung manufacturing plant, which got a huge shortage of skills. And they're transitioning in Vietnam to a knowledge and technology-led economy. And they've seen a massive influx of multinationals coming in due to lower operating costs, physical proximity, lower population base, etc. Is this an opportunity, do you think, for VET providers to really reinvent the way they work in country by maybe leapfrogging, building the market through innovative learning platforms, you know, VR, AR, which James referred to, on-site training centres, industry partnerships, etc.? How should we be responding because of the opportunity once we come out of this mess?
Yeah, look, I think there is plenty of opportunity there, and there's certainly a lot of vocational institutions who are already heavily involved in delivery offshore. Generally, there are three ways that vocational providers work offshore. One is government to government. For us in the TAFE sector, it might be institution to institution, where often it is about delivering qualification outcomes, and then it's direct into industry. So, you know, there is the potential, particularly that direct into industry. You can look at accredited training where they have, you know, a qualification outcome if needed. But more often than not, when industry is approaching us from overseas, they're looking at short-term skill sets upgrading. So the non-accredited training that allows them to have employees that can do the jobs that they need to do, or change from one job to another, and in a much shorter time. Most vocational providers, when they look at that sort of training, they will try to use units of competency that will lead to a qualification outcome eventually, so that the person has the ability to be able to gain a qualification. But generally, employers don't want their employees out of the game for a long while to do a lot of study. They just want a short-term fix to be able to manage their workplace and their operational needs. So yeah, I think it's a really important factor. But again, it's then educating those government departments or the industry offshore about how and what capacity vocational institutions have, you know. A lot of people still think, even in Australia, that, you know, vocational training is about the dirty trades and nothing else. You know, they don't see that there's a broad range of service industries that we, you know, train in or train for. So yeah, it is, a lot of it is about educating, and I personally find over the years that it is about those people in those government offices offshore. If they can understand what the capacity is in the VET space, then they can then underpin all of their conversations with that in market. And so there is more likely to be some sort of traction.
I agree with you, and it's also not about taking, you know, the platform of this is our set of products, take it to everyone. You know, even at a local level, I saw an example the other day. SUNY TAFE in far northwest Victoria, they have adapted their horticulture and agricultural because they're now no longer just citrus; it's also the big almond industry and large-scale practices. So they've got to adapt according to those. So TAFE and VET I should say, very good at adapting. And that's really, it comes on to the fact there's been a lot of coverage around universities, the impact on belly costs well documented. Yet vet, I don't know, I find it frustrating. I find it's the real story.
You're preaching to the converted.
I know, I think I am. I think we've known each other too long, but I think it's so true. And I saw some data the other day, 91% of the 149,000 vet visa holders are actually in Australia, with the highest proportion coming from Nepal, India, Philippines, my memory. And many of these students will complete their studies this year, look to transfer to university, find work, return home. Do you anticipate that many of the next cohort of vet graduates may enroll into new vet programs? And I've asked that question in another way, but given the volatile external dynamics, do you think they're actually really embracing this concept I did raise about building a portfolio and constantly, lifelong learning is becoming such a big part of the landscape now?
Yeah. Look, I think yes, but again, I'll put the condition around Home Affairs have to agree to that. So generally, not always, but just if I took a blanket rule, is generally Home Affairs do not look favourably upon a student who's done a diploma and then wants to do another diploma, unless it's already packaged up front. So there is going to be, again, that perception that they're not a genuine temporary entrant, and that just raises huge alarm bells from a Home Affairs point of view. Whether it's a valid reason, whether there is valid reasoning behind it, that's not part of the conversation, because we know that often that they might need skill sets in a couple of different areas, or things may have changed, so that the employment opportunities in their initial program may not be there now, and they want to move to something else. But again, we need to get all parts of government understanding that that is the case, that people can be genuine but want to do more than one vocational program. We've fought for years over the fact that students that are doing a degree to be able to do another vocational program that might help build their skill sets while they're studying their university degree concurrently. Years ago, they used to be able to do that. Now there's a lot more restrictions around that happening. So, as long as you didn't impact on your principal program of study, you could study other areas, and vocational institutions were able to offer short-term programs that were relevant to the students' industry needs or graduate outcomes. Whereas that's frowned upon now. So it's as much as I would like to think that we're moving ahead and that we've got this right with vocational institutions and vocational training, I still think there's a lot of educating that needs to happen. Industry gets it, and sometimes it's just easier to go direct to industry and being able to meet their needs rather than trying to go through all the bureaucracy around other ways of doing work.
Yeah, that is interesting. Having the idea that, to be honest, I didn't realize that Home Affairs looked at someone who did a diploma and then another diploma negatively. I completely agree with you. It makes logical sense if you want to, by the time you get to the end, especially now, if you get to the end and you're doing a degree in tourism and there's no borders open, then you might want to do a 6-month diploma and another year in something else, and in computer engineering. But if that's looked upon as not a genuine student, then that's a problem. Yeah, that's a big one. The polls are closed. You can see the results here. They should be available to you all. Interesting, 49%. Okay, so let's go to this one. Do you believe that there will be an increase in the number of international students studying higher education degrees at vet institutions? 49% says slightly more. Do you believe that more international university graduates will then study at TAFE to build their portfolio of work-ready skills? Slightly more, and about the same, exactly the same at 33%. And then the last question, what will be the biggest hurdles in 2021 to attracting new international vet students? 63% believe it will be the travel restrictions. Yes, that's a big one, actually. That's a resounding 63%. Does that surprise you guys? I'm not sure.
I think I'm a little bit surprised by that one, James, but I'm surprised but not surprised, because I think people are now looking at it very logically. They're looking, is it the restrictions in Australia, or is it restrictions because certain countries are showing bad signs? You know, Brazil being an example, or you know, there's talk about Indonesia now going to be the next bad market for this. So I think it's a matter of flow through. I think we'll see some access. You know, we might see more from Singapore, Malaysia, and what they might say is one's under control. But it's difficult. Janelle, what do you think?
And it's two ways, you know. It's two ways. It might be the other country has to let people leave, you know, and that's something that not everyone is doing this two-way travel.
I think in lots of ways of the way that COVID-19 has gone across the globe, not all at the same time. So we've got these waves and, you know, and drops in different countries has kind of made it harder for us in some respects, because, you know, it means that, you know, not everyone reached their peak at the same time. So therefore we can comfortably and confidently open up borders from this point on, or from a certain date on. And that's why I think that the government has reticence, you know, and I've got to say for you know, probably Queensland and Western Australia, there's also the underlying issue that there are state elections this year that impact on the decisions that are being made, and so that, you know, comes into play. You know, the federal government is saying that they will only open up borders when all state borders are open and people come back face to face and all those sorts of things. So there's still too many moving parts for my liking to be able to see a very clear outcome for Australia. You know, France has put down a date as the welcome back to international students. Whether they're ready for it or not might be a different story. But, you know, I think we need to have that cohesive government approach and get that message out there that, you know, yes, we're ready to take on international students, because the more we are ambivalent or we're ambiguous about that, then the more students or agents will counsel students to go to another market. They're likely to get in, therefore the agents are likely to get their commission, and that's what it'll come down to.
I know it's like this whole crisis is shining a huge spotlight on all the weaknesses of capitalism and globalization. So travel, everything is just coming to a complete stop. Oh man, it's you're right, absolutely right. There are so many variables that need to, you know, all the ducks need to line up before everything goes back to normal. I can't see it happening for a long time. So I don't know. Go on, Rob.
James, I'm seeing it astonishing as well that Britain has now announced July the 4th as almost completely freeing themselves up. Why? I mean, I live in Victoria. Here I am in Victoria, and we seem to be the bad story at the moment, and it's not that bad.
There's a reason why we're doing the webinars, Rob. We're not coming to you now. We did have ironically, we did have a question here from Kerry Sepp from Study Melbourne. What are the opportunities for Australian vet providers to differentiate from higher education? Janelle, what do you have to say about that one?
I am a firm believer in diversity. I think diversity gives you less risk. It allows you to upscale and downscale in any market, because we've all just spent the last, you know, hour or so talking about the things outside of our control, and that's just for Australia. So every other market will have decisions that they make, policy settings that they put in that will impact on us, and it's not under our control. So to me, diversity is the key. You know, for us in TAFE Queensland, about 4 years ago, we deliberately put in a diversity strategy. We only have one market over 10%, and it's not China or India. And that gives us less risk, unless the borders are closed and we can't do anything about that. But certainly, if there's anything else that's going on, we can upscale and downscale quickly, because we've got this really, you know, solid support foundation now that allows us to do that. So to me, diversity is the key. That can be our point of difference. And whether it's, you know, diversity of source market, it could be diversity of program offering. Maybe we're trying to be all things to all people, and we have this scattergun approach. Maybe we need to, you know, should we focus only on certain things? Should regions, and as far as location goes, should they focus on particular programs which are core for their region, and not try to do things outside of that? And then, you know, we then become known as, you know, doing what we do best, rather than trying to do things that we don't necessarily do well in every aspect.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, you're going to have to be open to change when change appears. So when, you know, if a big company comes knocking on your door and saying, look, we want to partner with you. We've got, you know, 1,000 jobs at the end of this, but we really need assistance training these people up. It's going to be up to those providers to partner with those big tech companies. We talked about that over the last couple of weeks to really latch onto that opportunity, ride the wave of change. You know, it's going to be those nimble ones that are able to do that quicker. And that's probably where I think the vet sector can probably do that faster than university. Shannon Hall said it's much easier for public providers, not so much for private RTOs specializing in a certain field. Yes.
See, I disagree with that. I mean, we had a lot of short-term pain for long-term gain. We had to lose student numbers. We had to, you know, put in schemes to be able to ensure that we had that diversity. Losing student numbers meant that we lost revenue. So that was a hard sell. You know, I don't think it's necessarily whether you're public or private or small or large. You just have to have that as your strategy, and everything else has to underpin that strategy. And then you can make it work. But you will experience short-term pain, there's no doubt. It could be a good time to do that now because you're in pain anyway. You might as well, you know, try to look at how you can actually diversify your market, source markets now.
Yeah, there's no time like the present. On that note, I am very cautious of your time. We've run out of time here, guys. Janelle, any closing comments or anything you want to address?
I just think that it's up to us as vet providers to be able to profile what we do best. I don't think vocational providers have done that well over the years. We have some great things, that we do. We just need to profile and promote the hell out of that, both in Australia, in our communities, to government, and then offshore as well. Universities do this well. They have been very loud and vocal. I think vet providers have the ability to be able to do it as well.
All right. There's a bit of a rallying cry across the sector. Get loud, everybody. Rob, any closing comments?
I just think vet is such a wonderful sector, and it's really, I agree, it's a bit of a sleeping giant. It's an enormously inspirational people, programs, services, just remarkable. And you know what, when vet goes into market, they often go in very quietly, where there's often a lot of noise in other areas. So I like that. I like this approach they take.
Right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And Janelle Chapman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Rob?
Janelle.
Thanks, mate.
Lovely.
Thank
you.
Okay, so all the poll questions are out. We will send this recording out tomorrow or on Friday, whenever we get around to editing it, and we'll send a survey link around. So please let us know what you thought of this. We'd love to improve it. Again, insiderguides.com.au is the resource for international students. If any of your international students are having a hard time or are looking for more information about hardship funds and try to navigate all this sort of stuff, please send them our way. We've got a whole team of writers trying to improve their experience, both pre-departure, pre-decision here in Australia, all across the country. This will be recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. And fantastic. See you next time, guys. Thanks so much. I had a really good time. Really interesting.
That's great. Thank you.
See you guys. Thanks. Bye.